Jack Weston, at the pinnacle of his wealth and power, had everything that most men could only dream of: a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city, a fleet of expensive cars, private jets at his disposal, and, of course, the most beautiful women who flocked to him, drawn to his magnetic presence, his tall, imposing frame, and his sharp jawline that seemed sculpted from the finest marble. But despite his enviable life, Jack's heart was empty, a void that could never be filled by material wealth or the fleeting pleasures of the world. He had learned from a young age that everything, from love to loyalty, was transactional, and so, when he married Maya, he believed he was simply completing the final act of securing his legacy. Maya was a beautiful woman, yes, but she was not the right woman. In his eyes, she was beneath him, a black woman from a humble background, a woman whose love he could take for granted, because it was the kind of devotion that came from a woman who had nothing but herself to give. Jack's parents, well-intentioned and traditional, had arranged the marriage to Maya when he was young, believing it was a path to stability and a perfect match. Yet Maya was a stark contrast to the women Jack fantasized about. She was kind, nurturing, soft-spoken, and radiated a warmth that Jack had never appreciated. He married her with little thought, his heart occupied by ambitions far greater than the concept of love. He was obsessed with power, with status, with wealth, and above all, with beauty. His eyes constantly roamed the most glamorous circles, admiring the perfect symmetry of white women, convinced that the power of a man could only truly shine when paired with the image of the perfect woman beside him. Maya, unaware of his heart's coldness, was overjoyed to marry Jack. She saw in him not just a wealthy businessman, but the man who would help her escape the struggles of her past, a life filled with hardship and poverty. She loved him with everything she had. She believed in him, believed in their future, and loved him so much that she overlooked the subtle slights, the cold dismissals, and the emotional neglect she endured. She embraced him with tender affection, hoping he would one day see her, love her as deeply as she loved him. She did everything she could to make him happy. She cooked his meals with care, ensured his shirts were perfectly pressed, and made sure the house was always immaculate. When she became pregnant with their child, Jack showed little interest. His focus remained on business, and his only concern was how this new chapter of their lives would affect his image in the eyes of his business partners and investors. Maya carried their child with a sense of pride, yet a quiet fear lingered in her heart. She could sense the emotional distance growing between them, feel the coldness in his gaze. She had always dreamed of a husband who would cherish her, who would share in the joy of their child's birth, who would be there for every milestone. But Jack's love was conditional. His love had always been wrapped in layers of superficiality. When she was 6 months pregnant, Jack, in a fit of frustration over a business deal gone awry, delivered the final blow. He demanded a divorce, citing that he needed to focus on his career, and that Maya simply wasn't the right fit for his image anymore. He couldn't understand why his wife, with her smile, her devotion, her warmth, wasn't enough to fill the hole in his soul. Maya was devastated. She had never imagined that the man she loved would so easily discard her, especially at a time when she needed his support the most. But, with a tearful heart, she packed her things and left the mansion she had once hoped would be a home. She left Jack's cold world behind, her dreams shattered, but she carried with her the two most precious parts of him, the twins she was carrying. She moved into a tiny apartment, a far cry from the luxury of the mansion she had once inhabited, but it was a place where she could find peace away from the harsh world Jack had thrust her into. Life was an endless struggle, but Maya was strong. She had no choice but to be. She worked tirelessly to provide for her children, taking on multiple jobs that drained her physically, but never spiritually. She never spoke of Jack to the twins. They were far too young to understand. And Maya didn't want them to grow up with the bitterness she felt in her heart. But there were moments when the pain was too much to bear. There were nights when the tears would fall as she held her babies close, praying that they would never know the cruelty of a man who had once promised to love her. Meanwhile, Jack continued his life, as if nothing had changed. He remarried a few years later to Isabella, a stunning, elegant woman whose beauty matched the image he had always wanted by his side. Isabella was everything Jack had ever dreamed of. Tall, blonde, blue-eyed, the epitome of grace and charm. To the world, they were the perfect couple, their names always linked to the highest echelons of society. But even as Jack basked in his newfound life of wealth and status, something gnawed at him. The emptiness inside him refused to disappear. His life, once filled with ambition and the pursuit of external validation, had become a hollow shell. He tried to ignore the sense of loneliness that grew with each passing day. Isabella, despite her beauty, seemed uninterested in Jack beyond the life he could provide. She would rather spend her nights at extravagant parties, surrounded by people who admired her for her looks rather than her character. Jack, increasingly frustrated by her coldness, couldn't help but compare her to Maya. His thoughts would often wander back to the first wife he had cast aside so carelessly. What had he done? Why had he never valued her? Why had he been so blind to the love that had been right in front of him? The quiet ache in his heart grew louder, but Jack continued to deny it, drowning himself in work and wealth. The emptiness only deepened. The man who had once seemed so powerful now felt like a shadow of himself. Little did Jack know that the regret that was starting to creep into his soul would soon become a flood that he could no longer ignore. But for now, he remained trapped in his gilded cage, unaware of the twists of fate that would soon begin to unravel his life in ways he never anticipated. Jack Weston sat in the cold, sterile office, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the only sound that filled the heavy silence between him and his lawyer. His mind was numb, his thoughts scattered and fractured like shards of glass, each piece sharp and dangerous. It had been months since he had signed the papers, months since he had made the decision that would irrevocably alter the course of his life. He had divorced Maya, the woman who had once filled his world with warmth, and yet there was a hollow emptiness that gnawed at his insides now, one that no amount of wealth, no number of accolades could fill. He had believed once that his life was perfect, a life built on power, status, and beauty. But somewhere, beneath all the polished surfaces and the opulence, something had cracked. Maya, his first wife, had been the first casualty of that fracture. He had discarded her as easily as one might discard an old piece of clothing. And for what? What had he gained? The answer, as he now realized, was nothing. Jack leaned back in his chair, staring blankly at the wall in front of him, as the lawyer's words echoed in his ears. They had finalized the divorce months ago, but today was the day the final details were being processed. The house, the assets, the business, everything that had once been part of the life he had shared with Maya was now his to keep. But it felt like nothing more than a series of empty, lifeless possessions. He had won, but at what cost? He had never cared much for Maya's love, had never truly appreciated her loyalty, her tenderness, and the way she had supported him without question. She had given him everything, and he had given her nothing in return, save for coldness and neglect. And yet, when he thought about her, he could still feel the warmth of her touch, the gentleness of her voice, the way her eyes had always looked at him with so much hope and faith. Why had I thrown that away? Jack wondered, the question repeating itself like a broken record in his mind. His second marriage to Isabella, though glamorous and filled with the trappings of wealth, was nothing like he had imagined. Isabella, with her flawless beauty and sharp wit, seemed to be the perfect woman on paper. She was everything he thought he wanted, the woman who would elevate his status even higher, the woman who could stand by his side as a symbol of his success. But somewhere along the way, he'd begun to feel the sharp pangs of loneliness again, a loneliness he hadn't expected. Isabella, for all her grace and charm, was distant, aloof even. She spent more time at parties, surrounded by her friends, than she did with him. Jack found himself watching her from across their grand, marble-laden home, wondering what had happened to the connection they had once shared. There was a disconnect, a gap between them that grew wider with each passing day. He would try to reach out to her, to romance her, to revive the passion that once seemed so easy. But Isabella would pull away, her disinterest palpable. It stung. It shouldn't have. It wasn't like he had any deep feelings for her, or at least he had convinced himself of that. But there was something about her indifference that sparked a cold realization in him. I've become like her, he thought bitterly. Cold, detached, unreachable. Jack's thoughts turned back to Maya, the woman he had thrown away for someone he thought would be a better fit, someone who would be his perfect match. But Isabella wasn't the woman who made him feel alive, who made him want to be a better person. Maya was. A wave of guilt washed over him, and for the first time in a long while, Jack felt something like remorse. What have I done? He asked himself, the question gnawing at his insides. The reality of what he had lost hit him with a sudden ferocity. Maya had been his anchor, the one person who had loved him without any pretense. She had sacrificed everything for him, and he had repaid her by casting her aside when she was pregnant with their children. How could I have been so blind? Jack's chest tightened, and he found himself fighting to breathe. The years of emotional detachment, of building walls around himself, had come crashing down in a single crushing moment of self-awareness. Maya had loved him unconditionally, and he had destroyed her for the sake of his ego. His mind flashed to her face, the way she had looked at him with such tenderness, with such hope. And now she was gone from his life, with his children, living her own life far away from him. He wondered what she had become in the years since their divorce. Had she remarried? Had she found someone who would love her the way she deserved? Or was she still alone, struggling to raise their children without him? Jack's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. He looked up, his mind still clouded, and saw Isabella standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Jack," she said, her voice cold, distant. "We need to talk." She stepped into the room, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "About what?" Jack's voice was flat, lacking the energy it once had. Isabella gave him a piercing look, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I know you've been distant," she said, crossing her arms. "I know you're not happy. And frankly, neither am I." Jack swallowed hard, trying to mask the discomfort he felt. "What are you talking about?" Isabella stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "I don't want to be with someone who is living in the past, Jack. You're still thinking about her, aren't you? Maya." The name hit Jack like a slap to the face. He recoiled, his throat tightening. "Don't say her name," he muttered. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. Isabella's words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "You think about her, don't you? Every day you regret what you did to her. You can't stop comparing me to her, and it's eating you alive." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. How did she know? "I don't—" He trailed off, unable to lie convincingly. "You think about her every night when you go to bed," Isabella continued, her voice rising with frustration. "You're still haunted by the fact that you treated her like crap, and now you're paying the price for it. I can see it. I'm not stupid, Jack. You're miserable." The words hit like a cold, hard slap, and Jack found himself trembling with the weight of the truth. Isabella was right. She could see it, even if he couldn't admit it to himself. Maya had been the one, the woman he had thrown away, the one who had loved him in a way that no one else ever could. And now it was too late. The tension in Jack's chest didn't dissipate even after Isabella left the room, her heels clicking against the cold marble as she stormed out. Her words echoed in his mind, ringing louder with each passing second. "You're still haunted by the fact that you treated her like crap, and now you're paying the price for it." Jack stood motionless, staring at the door she had just exited, his heart hammering violently in his chest. The house, once full of laughter and the promise of success, now felt like a tomb, empty and suffocating. The coldness of the walls seemed to close in around him as he replayed his life in agonizing detail. His betrayal of Maya, his cruel abandonment of her when she needed him most. He could still see her face in his mind's eye, the way she looked at him with unwavering love, even as he shut her out, time and time again. How could I have been so blind? The question echoed relentlessly, tormenting him. His heart twisted with guilt, and he knew that no amount of wealth or success could fill the void that had opened up inside him. It was a void created by the loss of the one person who had loved him unconditionally. Jack had built his empire on ambition and power, but none of it meant a damn thing now. All his money, all his achievements, they felt hollow, meaningless. What was success if he couldn't even hold on to the love that mattered most? He had been so obsessed with the image of perfection that he had lost sight of what was real, what was true. Isabella was beautiful, yes, but she was not the woman who made him feel alive. Maya had been the one who had loved him without pretense, the one who had cared for him when no one else did. And now, Maya was gone. Gone from his life, taking their children with her. I destroyed everything. The thought crushed him. For a moment, Jack closed his eyes and let the weight of his regret consume him. He had done everything wrong. Everything. The marriage to Isabella had been a desperate attempt to fill the void Maya had left behind, but it had failed miserably. Isabella's beauty and charm couldn't soothe the ache in his heart. She was distant, uninterested, and her coldness was a constant reminder that he was alone, even when surrounded by luxury. Jack's thoughts turned back to Maya, and a deep sorrow settled in his chest. He had been a fool to let her go, a fool to believe that someone like Isabella could ever replace the woman who had been his first love, the mother of his children. Jack had thought he could leave the past behind, but now he realized it was the past that was slowly suffocating him. The house felt colder than ever, and he needed to escape, to do something to numb the pain. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden ringing, the sharp sound of his phone breaking the silence. It was an unknown number, but something compelled him to answer. "Hello?" His voice was hoarse, raw from the emotional storm that had torn through him. "Jack Weston." The voice on the other end was familiar, though it took him a moment to place it. "It's Maya," she said quietly. "Maya," Jack repeated, his voice barely a whisper. There was a long pause on the line before Maya spoke again. "I heard about Isabella." Jack's heart sank. The news of Isabella's death had spread like wildfire, and even though he hadn't yet spoken to Maya, he had expected that she would eventually find out. I'm sorry, Maya," Jack said, his voice faltering. "I didn't—" "Don't," Maya interrupted softly. "You don't need to apologize to me." Her words were gentle, but there was an unmistakable edge to them, a hardness that Jack hadn't expected. "I just wanted to let you know that I'm thinking about you, and I'm sorry for what you're going through." There was a brief silence before she added, "I'm not angry, Jack. I don't even know what I feel anymore, but I wanted to say that I forgive you." The words hit Jack like a punch to the gut. She forgives me? He hadn't even known if he deserved her forgiveness, but here she was, offering it so freely, so gracefully. Maya had always been the better person. She had always been the one to hold things together, even when he had been too blind to see the love she had for him. "Maya, Jack's throat tightened. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't even deserve to speak to you. I destroyed everything. I ruined our lives." His voice cracked, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the weight of his actions. "I don't know how to make things right." "You can't change the past, Jack," Maya said, her voice steady, but filled with a quiet sorrow. "But you can learn from it. You can become a better person. For your children, if not for yourself." Her words struck a chord deep within him. His children. They had been the one thing he had always loved, the one thing he had never taken for granted. He thought of Zara and Isaiah growing up without him, without the family they deserved. A sharp pang of regret pierced his heart. He had never even asked about them, never cared enough to be a part of their lives. "What kind of father am I? I want to see them," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya was quiet for a moment, and Jack held his breath, unsure of how she would respond. "I don't know if that's a good idea," she finally said. "They're happy, Jack. They're thriving. I've done my best to raise them with love and care, even without you. But they don't need the past coming back to haunt them." Jack's heart sank, but he knew she was right. He had no place in their lives anymore. He had abandoned them, abandoned her, when she needed him the most. The reality of his mistakes weighed down on him like an anchor, and for the first time, Jack realized just how much he had lost. "I'll do whatever it takes, Maya," he said, his voice filled with a newfound determination. "I'll prove to you that I can be a better man. I'll prove it to them, to you, and to myself." Maya didn't respond immediately, and Jack wondered if she even believed him. But after a long pause, she finally spoke again. "I'm not doing this for you, Jack. I'm doing this for my children. And for me. I've moved on from what we were. But if you truly want to change, if you truly want to be part of their lives, you'll have to show it, not just say it." Jack's heart was pounding in his chest. This was it. This was the chance he had been waiting for, the chance to make things right. He wasn't sure how or when, or even if it was possible. But he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't let this opportunity slip away. "I understand," he said, his voice steady. "Thank you, Maya, for everything. And I promise you, I will make this right." There was a soft sigh on the other end of the line. "I'll think about it," Maya said, her voice gentle but firm. "But for now, I need to focus on my children. I need to focus on my life." Jack nodded, though he knew she couldn't see him. "I'll respect that. Thank you, Maya." With a final, quiet goodbye, Maya hung up. Jack stood in silence for a long moment, his mind spinning with the weight of the conversation. This is my chance. It was his chance to make amends, to show Maya, to show his children, that he could be the man they deserved. It wouldn't be easy, and he knew he had a long road ahead of him. But for the first time in years, Jack felt something other than regret, a spark of hope, a flicker of possibility. And he would do whatever it took to turn it into something real. Jack stared blankly at his phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he held it in his hand. The conversation with Maya had left him in a daze, his mind still spinning with the weight of her words. She had forgiven him. She had forgiven him. It felt almost unreal, as if he were trapped in a dream, unable to wake up and confront the harshness of reality. He had ruined everything, and yet Maya's grace and kindness had allowed him to believe there might still be a chance to right his wrongs. But as the initial shock of the phone call began to wear off, a cold realization settled over him. Forgiveness didn't erase the past. It didn't undo the years of neglect, the abandonment, or the pain he had caused. It didn't bring back the years he had lost with his children. Zara and Isaiah. His heart clenched at the thought of them. Two beautiful, innocent souls who had grown up without him. Without the father they deserved. He had missed their birthdays, their first words, their first steps. He had been so blinded by his own ambition, by his obsession with wealth and status, that he had failed to see what truly mattered. What kind of father am I? Jack's mind whirled with self-loathing as the guilt weighed heavily on him, each breath feeling like a struggle to pull in enough air to keep going. But now I have a chance. The thought lingered in his mind, like a distant light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. Maya had given him an opportunity to change, to prove himself. She hadn't closed the door entirely. He still had a chance to be a part of his children's lives, to show them that he could be the man they needed. But how? How could he possibly make up for all the time he had lost? How could he even begin to repair the damage he had caused? His mind raced, turning over 100 possibilities, none of which seemed to be enough. The truth was, he didn't know where to start. All he knew was that he had to act, and fast. But just as quickly as his thoughts swirled in circles, his phone rang again, interrupting his frantic mind. This time, it was a call he hadn't expected. The name on the screen made his heart skip a beat. Isabella. She had never called him before. Since the funeral, since the news of her heart attack, Isabella had been distant, cold, even more so than before. Jack had assumed that the distance between them was permanent, that their marriage had already ended long before her sudden death. He had spent the last few days in a haze, trying to process everything, the guilt, the loss, and the regrets that had come crashing down on him like a tidal wave. But now, Isabella was calling him, and the unfamiliarity of the situation sent a wave of panic through him. What could she possibly want? His hand trembled as he answered the phone. "Hello?" Jack's voice was hesitant, unsure of what he was about to hear. There was a long pause on the other end before Isabella's voice came through, soft but strained. "Jack," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Isabella." Jack's heart began to pound as he tried to make sense of the strange sense of urgency in her voice. "Are you okay?" His mind raced, wondering if there was something he didn't know, something he had missed in the aftermath of her sudden death. "No," Isabella said, her voice shaking now. "I need to tell you something. Something about the children." Jack's chest tightened. "What about them?" he asked, his voice laced with panic. "It's important, Jack. You need to listen to me carefully." Isabella's voice faltered, and for a brief moment, Jack thought he might hear her cry, but she quickly regained her composure. "I never told you this, Jack. About Maya. About what happened after you left. She didn't just leave. She didn't just go away with the children and disappear. Maya, Her voice trembled again, and Jack could hear the strain in her words. "Maya wasn't just a woman I replaced. She was my friend. And she loved you. She loved you more than anyone else could ever understand. And she had a reason for leaving. A reason she kept from everyone, including you." Jack's breath caught in his throat as his mind raced, trying to piece together what Isabella was saying. "What do you mean? What reason?" he asked, his voice rising with the urgency of the moment. There was a long silence on the other end, and for a moment Jack thought Isabella had hung up. But then she spoke. Again, her words coming in a choked whisper. "The twins. They're not yours, Jack." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. His stomach dropped, and he stumbled back, his mind reeling in disbelief. "The twins aren't mine." His world seemed to tilt on its axis as he tried to process what Isabella was saying. It didn't make sense. What was she talking about? "What are you saying?" Jack managed to croak, his voice barely audible as he tried to regain his composure. Isabella's voice was trembling now, raw with emotion. "Maya never told you the truth. You never asked. But the twins, they're not your children, Jack. They're his. Maya's new husband, the man she married after you left. The one who actually loved her." Jack's mind was a storm, each thought crashing into the next, each emotion jarring and painful. This can't be true. The silence stretched between them like an eternity. Jack could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears as he tried to make sense of the revelation. The twins weren't mine. How had he not known? How had he never suspected? His mind was consumed by a whirlwind of emotions: shock, betrayal, anger, confusion. But beneath all of it, there was a strange sense of relief. Maybe this was the universe telling me I was never meant to be their father. Maybe he had been wrong to think he could somehow reclaim his place in their lives, to believe that he could undo all the damage he had caused. His thoughts were interrupted by Isabella's shaky voice once more. "I'm sorry, Jack. I should have told you sooner. But Maya loved you, and she thought she could save you. She wanted you to be happy. She never wanted to hurt you." Jack stood frozen, his heart a tangled mess of emotions. There was no more room for denial, no more room for the comfortable lie that he had been living. The twins were not his. His life, everything he had worked so hard for, had been built on lies, on misplaced ambition, on a foundation that was now crumbling beneath him. And yet, as he stood there, caught between a past he could no longer escape and a future that seemed more uncertain than ever, a strange sense of clarity began to seep into his soul. This was my moment to truly change. If Maya could forgive him, if she could move forward despite everything he had done, then maybe, just maybe, he could find the strength to do the same. Jack stood there, his hands trembling as he gripped the phone, Isabella's words still ringing in his ears like a haunting melody he couldn't shake. "The twins aren't mine." Those words, as simple as they were, shattered everything he had thought he knew about his past. For years, Jack had been living with the belief that his legacy, his future, was tied to the children he had never fully embraced. But now, in one breath, Isabella had revealed the devastating truth. Zara and Isaiah, the twins he had abandoned, were not his biological children. The anger, confusion, and disbelief churned within him like a storm, each emotion crashing against the other with relentless force. How could I have been so blind? He had spent years looking at them, believing they were his flesh and blood, believing they carried his name, his legacy. But they weren't his, and the realization hit him harder than anything he had ever felt. It wasn't just the shock of the betrayal, it was the weight of the years wasted. The years he had spent chasing wealth, chasing power, chasing the image of success that had consumed him, leaving no room for the people who truly mattered. How could Maya have kept this from me? How could she have let me go on believing this lie? His mind raced, questions flying at him from every direction, but none of them had any answers. He felt like a man standing at the edge of a precipice, the ground beneath him crumbling, and yet he couldn't take his eyes off the vast emptiness ahead of him. For the first time in years, Jack felt utterly lost. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary, a place where he could hide from his emotions, now felt like a prison. The walls seemed to close in on him as the weight of his life choices crushed him. He had built his empire on ambition and greed, but now it all felt pointless, hollow. I'm alone. The thought hit him like a physical blow, and he sank into the nearest chair, his head in his hands. Everything he had worked for, everything he had fought for, was now meaningless. What did it all matter if he had no one to share it with? What did it matter if he had built his wealth on the backs of lies, on the pain of others? The bitter truth of the matter was that Jack Weston, the billionaire, the man who had everything, was nothing more than a hollow shell. He had spent so much of his life chasing things that didn't matter, only to realize too late that the one thing he had always wanted, real love, real connection, had slipped through his fingers, and now it was gone. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock on the door, and Jack's head snapped up. His pulse quickened as the door creaked open, and he saw Isabella standing there, her face pale, her eyes wide with something that might have been fear, but was now a hard mask of resignation. She stepped inside, without waiting for an invitation, her gaze focused on him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "Jack," she began, her voice calm but strained, "I never wanted to hurt you." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with an emotion he could hardly put into words. "Then why, Isabella? Why did you let me live in this lie?" His voice was raw, tinged with the pain of the realization that everything he had believed about his life had been a carefully crafted illusion. Isabella winced, but her gaze never faltered. "I didn't know how to tell you. Maya didn't want you to know. She thought you would fall apart, that it would destroy you." Jack's eyes narrowed, his anger rising again, though it was tempered with something else, something darker. "And you went along with it," he spat, standing up now, his fists clenched at his sides. Isabella's eyes flickered with something akin to regret, but she didn't back down. "I had no choice, Jack. Maya asked me not to say anything. She was trying to protect you, to protect us all." There was a long pause, the silence between them thick with the weight of everything unsaid. Jack's mind raced as he tried to process the complexity of what she was saying. Maya, the woman he had wronged so many years ago, had been protecting him. Even now, after everything, she had cared for him in some way. He couldn't understand it, but there was something about the way Isabella said it that made him pause, made him reconsider everything. Maya hadn't just walked away from him in anger. She had been trying to protect him from something far worse. But from what? "Protect me from what?" Jack asked, his voice now quieter, tinged with a new kind of confusion. Isabella took a deep breath, her shoulders sagging slightly, as if the weight of the truth was finally becoming too much for her to bear. "Because Maya didn't just leave you for another man, Jack. She left because she couldn't live with the pain of seeing you destroy yourself. She couldn't stand to watch you lose everything you had just to gain more, only to end up empty inside. You had so much, Jack. You had everything anyone could ever want. But you were still miserable." Jack's heart dropped at her words. He had been so consumed with the idea of power, of success, of proving himself to the world, that he had never stopped to ask the most important question of all. Was he happy? Had any of it ever made him happy? He had been living for the approval of others, chasing validation from a world that didn't care about him. He had pushed away the one person who had loved him unconditionally. And for what? What had he gained? Wealth? Status? They meant nothing. Not anymore. The reality of his life was crashing down around him, and Jack realized with a sickening clarity that Isabella was right. He had destroyed himself long before he had ever destroyed his marriage. He had destroyed his soul. Maya, she didn't deserve any of this, he whispered, his voice filled with sorrow. Isabella's expression softened, but her eyes were still guarded. No, she didn't. But she forgave you, Jack. That's the part you need to understand. She forgave you for everything. Jack's throat tightened as the weight of her words settled into him like a stone in his stomach. Forgiveness. He didn't deserve it. But Maya had given it to him anyway. She had given him a chance, a final opportunity to make things right. But how could he ever repay her for the years he had wasted? How could he ever hope to earn back her trust, her love? It's too late, he whispered, his voice thick with regret. Isabella shook her head, her eyes fierce with conviction. "No, Jack, it's not too late. But you have to be willing to fight for it. You have to be willing to change." Jack's eyes met hers, and in that moment, something shifted inside him. It was as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, and for the first time in years, he felt awake, alive. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He had a second chance, and he was going to fight for it, no matter what. Even if it meant facing the hardest truth of all, that his path to redemption began with confronting the very man he had been. The man who had lost everything to greed, pride, and fear. But Jack Weston was ready to fight for the love he had thrown away, ready to fight for the family he had neglected, and most of all, ready to fight for himself. And this time, he wouldn't back down. Jack stood in the middle of the room, the weight of Isabella's words still echoing in his mind like a reverberating drumbeat. His heart felt heavier than it had ever been before. Yet, within the suffocating pressure of his despair, there was a flicker of something new, something sharp and dangerous, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. It was a strange sensation, foreign even, but it was there, nestled deep inside him, like a flame that threatened to burn through the suffocating fog of regret and loss that had enveloped his life. He had been on the edge for so long, teetering between a life he had created and one he had abandoned. But now, with Isabella's truth weighing on him, everything had changed. The world outside still seemed distant, unreachable, but the battle he had to face was no longer just about his success. It was about himself. How much of the man he had become could he truly change? How much of the man he was willing to shed in order to become something better? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his phone ringing again. He looked at it, and for a brief moment he hesitated. The name that flashed across the screen made his stomach drop. Maya. He had thought about her constantly, but now, facing her directly, felt almost too much. Could he face her? The woman he had left to fend for herself. The woman who had carried the pain of his departure for so long, only to forgive him. She forgave me. Jack's hand shook slightly as he picked up the phone. "Maya," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. On the other end, Maya's voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension that made Jack's chest tighten. "Jack," she said, and in that single word there was so much unspoken: pain, betrayal, love, and perhaps forgiveness. I wanted to speak with you." The words hung in the air like a fragile thread, the silence between them growing as Maya took a long breath. "You don't have to say anything if you're not ready, but I need to tell you something. It's important." Jack swallowed hard. He had no idea what she was going to say, but the gravity in her voice told him it was something he needed to hear. "What is it, Maya?" he asked, his voice steady, despite the rapid beating of his heart. There was a pause, and then Maya spoke again, her words soft but clear. "It's about the twins, about Zara and Isaiah." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. What about them? For a moment, he thought his heart had stopped beating altogether. "What about them?" he asked, his voice thick with fear. Maya took another deep breath, and Jack could almost hear the weight of the decision she was making. "Jack, I never wanted to hurt you," she began. "But there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you all those years ago. Something that changes everything." Jack could feel the tension building in his chest, each word she spoke pushing him further into the unknown. "What is it, Maya?" His voice cracked, and for the first time in a long while he felt vulnerable, exposed, as if every layer he had built around himself was starting to peel away. Maya's voice wavered, but she pressed on. "Zara and Isaiah, they're not just the children of my second husband. They're your children, Jack. They're your blood." The words hit him like a freight train, crashing into his soul with the force of everything he had ever believed about his life. His hands gripped the phone tighter, his knuckles turning white. What are you saying?" His voice was hoarse now, and for a moment he didn't think he could breathe. "How is this possible? I've already been told." "I know what you were told," Maya interrupted, her voice trembling. "But I couldn't keep the secret anymore, Jack. When I found out I was pregnant with the twins, I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to make you understand that you were the father. I was afraid of what it would do to you, to your family, to everything you had built." Jack's mind was spinning. His children, his flesh and blood. The realization was staggering, and for a moment it felt like the entire world had shifted beneath his feet. The truth had been hidden for so long, buried deep within the heart of a lie he had chosen to believe. But now, it was all crashing down in front of him. He had a family he never knew about, a family he had abandoned without even realizing it. "But why, Maya?" Jack whispered, his voice full of anguish. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you give me a chance to be their father?" There was a long silence on the other end of the phone, and Jack could feel the weight of Maya's words pressing down on her, on both of them. Finally, she spoke, her voice filled with sorrow and regret. "Because I didn't want you to resent them, Jack. I didn't want them to grow up knowing that their father had walked away from them before they were born. I wanted to protect them from the same hurt that you caused me." Jack's chest tightened as her words cut through him like a knife. Resent them? How could he resent his own children, even if they weren't his biological children? The pain of realizing how deeply he had hurt them, how deeply he had hurt Maya, was overwhelming. He had been so focused on his own pain, on his own pride, that he had never stopped to ask the most basic question. What about them? "I never wanted to hurt you, Jack," Maya said again, her voice now steady, even though Jack could sense the tears she was holding back. "But the truth is, I didn't know how to make you understand. I thought you'd leave us, and I couldn't let that happen." Jack's eyes closed as the guilt washed over him, drowning him in its suffocating tide. "I left her. I left them." The reality was more brutal than he had ever imagined. He had spent so many years justifying his actions, telling himself that Maya was better off without him, that he had done the right thing by walking away. But now it all seemed like a lie, a beautiful twisted lie he had been living in. "Maya." Jack's voice broke, and he struggled to find the words to say, to express the sorrow he felt. "I was wrong. I was so wrong." Maya was silent for a long time before she finally spoke, her voice soft, but full of a quiet strength that Jack couldn't ignore. "It's not too late, Jack. You're still their father, and they need you. They need you more than anything. Don't let your pride destroy what's left of this family." The words echoed in Jack's ears, each one resonating deep within him, like a drumbeat reminding him of everything he had lost. Don't let your pride destroy this family. How many times had he let his pride dictate his actions? How many times had he walked away from love, from the people who mattered, because of his own selfish need to prove something to the world? But now, standing at the precipice of a life he could never take back, Jack realized that pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. I have to change. And for the first time, he knew what he had to do. He had to face the truth. He had to face his children, his past, and most of all, he had to face Maya. And maybe, just maybe, he could begin to build something new, something real, something that wasn't based on power or wealth, but on love, forgiveness, and redemption. Jack took a deep breath and finally spoke, his voice trembling with emotion. I'm coming to see them. I'm coming to see you. Jack hung up the phone, his mind in a whirlwind, his heart beating with a sense of urgency and purpose he hadn't felt in years. His decision to visit Maya and the twins wasn't just about reclaiming his place in their lives. It was about finding himself, about making up for the irreparable damage he had caused over the years. As he stood in the grand, empty hallway of his mansion, the silence was deafening, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for him to act. His thoughts raced back to the life he had built, his empire, his wealth, his success, and in that moment, everything felt hollow. The walls he had constructed, both literal and figurative, were crumbling around him. For so long he had convinced himself that power, wealth, and status were the ultimate markers of success. But what good was any of it if it came at the cost of everything that truly mattered? His family, his love, his children. The twins, Zara and Isaiah, had lived without him for so long, their lives shaped by the absence of the very man who should have been there for them. Jack had never even known they existed. Yet he had been a phantom in their world, a shadow haunting the edges of their story without them ever knowing who he truly was. And Maya? His chest tightened at the thought of her. She had suffered alone, carrying the weight of the betrayal on her shoulders, raising their children without him. She had done it all alone. And I left her. A surge of guilt washed over him, threatening to drown him in its force. He had chosen his ego, his need to control and dominate, over the woman who had loved him unconditionally. And for what? So he could prove he was more than just another man in the world. To what end? He had everything a man could ask for, yet he felt more empty now than he ever had before. Maya had forgiven him, despite everything, despite the pain he had caused, despite walking away from her and their unborn children. She had still found it in her heart to forgive him. How could she? He couldn't comprehend it. But now he had a chance to make things right. It was too late to undo the past, but it wasn't too late to fight for the future, for the family he should have been part of all along. The day was drawing to a close, and Jack could feel the weight of time pressing down on him. The urgency to act, to do something, to take responsibility for the mess he had created, was overwhelming. He reached for his jacket, his movements steady but deliberate, and stepped out of the mansion, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders with each step he took. As he approached the sleek black car that awaited him, the driver opened the door, and Jack slid into the back seat, his thoughts racing. He glanced out the window, the city lights blurring as they passed by, the speed of the car matching the frantic pace of his heart. How would Maya react when he showed up? Would she even let him in? After everything that had happened, after all the time they had spent apart, could he really expect her to open her heart to him again? He didn't know, but he had to try. His mind flitted to the twins. What would they think of him? Would they even want him in their lives? They had grown up without a father, without the man who was supposed to be their protector, their guide. He had been nothing to them, a stranger who had abandoned them before they were even born. Would they resent him for it? The thought of their anger, of the hurt he had caused them, made his stomach churn. How could I expect them to forgive me? The car sped through the city, the lights fading into the darkness of the countryside as they neared Maya's home. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. His mind raced with 1,000 questions, but one stood out above the rest. Would Maya let him in? Would she allow him to be part of their lives, part of the family he had ignored for so long? The car finally slowed as they pulled up to the modest house nestled on the outskirts of the town. It wasn't much by his standards, no marble floors, no grand chandeliers, no walls adorned with priceless paintings. But it was home. Home. The word echoed in his mind, and for the first time in years he realized how much he had missed it, how much he had longed for a place to belong, for people to love him without conditions, without expectations. He stepped out of the car, his legs shaking slightly as he walked toward the door. His hand hovered over the doorbell for a moment, and then he pressed it, the sound echoing in the quiet night. The door opened slowly, and Jack's breath caught in his throat when he saw Maya standing there, her face a mixture of surprise, wariness, and something else, something softer, something he couldn't quite place. Her eyes searched his face, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The weight of the years between them hung in the air, thick and unspoken. But Jack knew this was his chance. The first step. Maya opened the door wider, her gaze still intense, but now tinged with something else, something that told him she hadn't given up on him, not entirely. "Jack," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of everything they had been through. "What are you doing here?" Her question was simple, but the emotions behind it were anything but. Jack swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. I had to come. I couldn't stay away anymore. I need to make things right, Maya. I know I can't change the past, but I'm here now. I want to be part of their lives. I want to be part of yours." His words hung in the air between them, fragile and vulnerable. Maya's expression softened, but there was still a flicker of caution in her eyes. She had every right to be cautious. He had abandoned her once, and now here he was, asking for a second chance. Could she trust him? Would she let him in? The silence stretched between them, and for a moment Jack wondered if he had made a mistake. If he had come here with nothing but empty words, only to be turned away. But then Maya stepped aside, her eyes never leaving his. "Come in," she said, her voice soft but resolute. Jack stepped inside, and as the door closed behind him, he felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. It was a small step, but it was a step toward redemption, toward the family he had abandoned and the love he had failed to protect. But the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be tears, there would be anger, there would be struggles, but there would also be healing. And maybe, just maybe, this would be the beginning of something beautiful. A second chance at love, at family, at life itself. Jack didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while he was ready to face it head-on, with all the love and regret in his heart. As Maya led him into the living room, the sound of a children's laughter echoed from the other room. His heart skipped a beat as he saw Zara and Isaiah, the twins who had once been strangers to him, playing on the floor. His children. And for the first time in his life, Jack Weston realized that he wasn't alone. He had a family. He had a future. And it was time to fight for it. As Jack stepped deeper into the warmth of the humble living room, his heart thudded in a strange rhythm, a chaotic blend of awe, fear, guilt, and overwhelming emotion. As his eyes settled on Zara and Isaiah, his twins, laughing and playfully wrestling on the carpet, completely unaware that the man who had just walked into their world was their biological father. His breath hitched as a tidal wave of emotions crashed into him, memories of what could have been flooding his mind. Birthdays missed, scraped knees he didn't kiss better, bedtime stories he never told, and tiny hands that once reached out for him, but found only silence. Jack's soul trembled under the weight of all he had lost, all he had denied. Not only Maya, but these two brilliant, innocent souls who had grown up without knowing the touch, voice, or love of their father. He stepped forward, every inch of movement echoing a silent prayer that it wasn't too late. Maya's presence beside him grounded him, her quiet grace a stark contrast to the internal storm he battled. She watched him carefully, testing his sincerity with every breath he took, and Jack knew he was being measured, not just by her eyes, but by her heart, by the truth of his intentions. The twins noticed the stranger then, and their laughter slowed. Zara, with eyes like Maya's, tilted her head curiously. "Mum, who is he?" she asked, her voice sweet, cautious, and Jack's heart clenched at the sound. Isaiah followed suit, standing protectively next to his sister, already showing signs of the kind of boy who'd grow up to protect those he loved fiercely. Maya hesitated, looking to Jack as if to ask, "Are you ready?" And he nodded, knowing that the truth had to be spoken, even if it shattered what little image they had of the world. Maya knelt between her children, her voice steady and soft. "Kids, this is Jack. He's your father." The words lingered in the air like thick fog, hanging with a weight that made time itself pause. The silence that followed was deafening. Zara's face twisted in confusion. Isaiah narrowed his eyes, processing, reacting, defending. "Our father?" he echoed, skeptical. "But we don't have a dad." And that simple, pure truth cut through Jack more brutally than a blade ever could. He knelt, slowly, to their level, tears welling in his eyes that he didn't bother to hide. "You're right," he whispered. "You didn't. Because I wasn't there. And I don't expect you to understand or forgive me right away. But I'm here now, and I want to earn your trust, your love, if you'll let me." The children exchanged glances, uncertain, the innocence in their eyes shadowed by the sharpness of experience, an experience shaped by absence. But before either of them could respond, a knock on the door shattered the moment. Jack, confused, looked at Maya, who frowned and stood to answer it. She opened the door slowly and froze. Standing on the doorstep was a man, tall, rugged, and sharply dressed, with intense eyes that flicked immediately to Jack. "Well, well," the man said with a crooked smile. "Didn't expect to see you here, Weston." Jack narrowed his eyes. "Do I know you?" The man smirked. "No, but I know you. I'm Richard, Maya's Friend. The word twisted like a knife in Jack's chest. Maya looked uncomfortable, her posture stiff. Richard, now's not the time. But Richard stepped inside, ignoring her. I thought we were supposed to talk tonight, Maya. About the future. Jack's blood ran cold. The air thickened with an unspoken challenge. You two, Jack began. But Maya cut him off. Richard helped us a lot after you left. He's been around. Jack didn't need her to finish. The implication was clear, and it burned. Suddenly the room felt smaller, the air thinner. Jack's renewed sense of purpose faltered, shaken by this new shadow. Was he too late? Had Maya already begun to move on, to build a life that no longer had room for him? But he couldn't ask. Not now. Not like this. Richard eyed the twins and gave a charming smile. Hey, Z. Hey, Uncle Rich brought you some books. He handed them a small package, and both kids lit up, momentarily forgetting the emotional weight in the room. Jack watched as Isaiah high-fived Richard, and it stung. A storm brewed in his chest, jealousy, fear, sadness. But he said nothing. Maya was watching him, her gaze unreadable. We'll talk later, she said quietly to Richard. He nodded and left, but not before giving Jack a parting smirk that said, I'm not going anywhere. As the door closed, silence fell again. Jack sat back down, his thoughts a tangled mess. Are you with him? He asked Maya, unable to stop himself. She sighed. Does it matter, Jack? You weren't here. He was. The words were gentle, but they tore at him. But I'm here now, Jack said, almost pleading, and I want to be more than a shadow in their lives. Maya looked at him, and for a moment something flickered in her eyes. Pain, remembrance, maybe even hope. Then prove it. Not to me. To them. That night, Jack didn't return to his mansion. He stayed, on the couch, in a home far removed from the one he'd built with money, but filled with the kind of love and warmth money could never buy. As the twins slept, Jack sat awake, heart aching, watching their peaceful faces and mourning every second he had lost. He knew Richard wouldn't disappear quietly. He knew Maya's heart had scars deeper than he could imagine, but he also knew he had a second chance. And this time, he wouldn't waste it. The road ahead was uncertain, but Jack Weston was ready to walk it, through storms, through guilt, through love, toward redemption. Jack sat in the dim-lit living room long after the house had quieted down. The soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock, the only sounds keeping him tethered to reality. The warmth of Maya's home wrapped around him like a memory he'd never earned. The scent of cinnamon and old paper books, reminding him of what he'd missed, what he'd thrown away. His eyes never left the hallway where the twins slept. The faintest sound of Isaiah's restless turning behind the cracked door, pulling at him like a father's instinct that had never had the chance to grow. His chest rose and fell slowly, heavy with thoughts. He was here now, but he couldn't shake the echo of Richard's smirk, the subtle way he'd called himself Uncle Rich, or the way the twins had lit up when they saw him. Richard had clearly been part of their lives, filled the void Jack had created, and that left a bitter taste in his mouth. He hated that it mattered, but it did. Jack had never felt this kind of jealousy before. It wasn't about power, or status, or even love. It was about moments. First words, lost hugs, forgotten birthdays. He had no claim to those years, yet he wanted them anyway. The guilt crushed him, and so did the fear that Maya's heart might have drifted to another, while his own had remained asleep for far too long. He heard quiet footsteps, bare feet against the creaky floorboards, and turned to see Maya approaching in her robe, her eyes soft and tired. She looked more like the Maya he remembered than ever before. Not the hardened, cautious woman who'd opened the door to him hours ago, but the one who once cried quietly beside him during late-night storms, the one who had once kissed his anger away with kindness. She sat across from him, cradling a mug of tea like a shield. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "Too much noise. In my head." She gave a slight nod, understanding, her silence saying more than words could. "They're beautiful," Jack whispered, voice low. "You did that without me." Maya looked away for a moment, then met his eyes. "I didn't want to, but I had to." The pain in her voice was undeniable, and Jack felt it pierce through him. "Maya, I was wrong. About everything. About you. About what mattered. I thought I needed beauty and status, and someone who looked good beside me on a magazine cover. But you were the one who stayed, who sacrificed, who loved me despite me." She stared at him, her eyes glistening, and for a moment he feared he'd said too much. But instead of pushing him away, she whispered, "Then why didn't you fight for me?" That question hung in the air like a ghost. Jack had no good answer. "Because I was a coward," he admitted. "Because I thought I was better than I was. Because I didn't think I needed anyone." Maya sighed, a deep, painful exhale that seemed to release something ancient from her soul. "And now," Jack leaned forward, voice raw, "now I see that I need you more than I ever needed wealth or power. But I know that might not be enough." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken emotions. Then a sudden knock at the door broke it like glass. Jack and Maya exchanged tense glances. Too late for visitors, too early for peace. Maya hesitated, then went to open the door. A man in a dark suit stood there, holding an envelope. "Miss Daniels?" he asked. "You've been served." He handed her the paper and walked off. Not another word spoken. Maya's hands trembled as she opened the envelope, her eyes scanning quickly. Her face paled. "It's from Richard," she said quietly. "He's petitioning for joint custody of the twins." Jack stood up, heart racing. "What?" Maya dropped onto the couch, stunned. "He wants to be their legal guardian. He's claiming I'm emotionally unstable, that I've exposed them to unsafe situations." Her voice cracked. "He's using your return against me." The room spun, anger rising like a volcano inside Jack. "He's trying to take them away from you?" Maya nodded slowly, her eyes wide with betrayal. "He thinks I'm too vulnerable right now. That because you're back, I'm distracted." Jack ran his hands through his hair, pacing. "This isn't about guardianship. He's jealous. He wants control." Maya's hands clenched the papers. "I thought he was just a friend. I never thought he'd—" Jack knelt before her, placing a hand on her knee. "You won't lose them. I won't let that happen." She looked into his eyes, and for the first time since he'd arrived, there was a flicker of trust. But beneath it, fear loomed. "We'll have to fight him. Together," Jack said firmly. "He knows the system. He's rich, powerful, charming. So am I," Jack snapped. "But now I'm also a father, and I'm not running this time." Maya nodded, her eyes fierce despite the tears forming. "Then we do this. For them." Upstairs, the twins stirred in their sleep, unaware of the storm about to hit their world. But downstairs, two people, once broken, now reforging the bond they lost, were ready to face it. Together. The moment Jack and Maya solidified their decision to fight Richard's sudden custody claim, a new wave of emotional intensity stormed into their lives, reshaping every breath and heartbeat in their small, sacred space, a space now infiltrated by fear and fury. Maya clutched the custody petition with trembling fingers, her tears drying into resolve, while Jack, hands clenched and jaw tight, began making calls to his legal team, summoning every ounce of power he once used to crush corporate enemies, to now protect the fragile world he had rediscovered. As dawn broke, casting a pale gold across the living room windows, Jack stood facing the sun, his silhouette tall and still, like a soldier awaiting the battlefield, and Maya stepped beside him, drawn by both defiance and the silent rhythm of two hearts learning to beat again. The twins stirred awake, their sleepy faces unaware of the storm swelling outside their innocence. Jack bent low, smoothing Zara's hair as she blinked up at him, her soft voice asking, "Are you staying, Daddy?" And the title wrapped around his heart like chains forged in love and regret. "Yes, baby," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." But the peace was short-lived. That afternoon, Richard struck the first blow, not in court, but on the screens of a sensationalized news piece that aired across the city, a scandalous exposé showcasing edited images of Jack's past with Maya, distorted quotes suggesting mental instability, and rumors of Jack's sudden reappearance threatening the children's stability. Jack's face was painted as a manipulator, Maya as a broken woman too forgiving, and Richard as a noble protector. Maya watched the screen with her hands over her mouth, horror blooming in her eyes, and Jack's fists clenched with barely contained rage. "He's using the media to poison the court before we even speak," Jack growled, pacing. "He wants to turn public opinion, so it's already over before we begin." "He's not just after the kids," Maya said softly. "He's after revenge. He thinks I betrayed him by letting you back in." The room felt colder now, the world outside more dangerous than ever. But Jack wasn't the same man who once let go of the woman who loved him. He gathered every resource, private investigators, media experts, psychologists willing to testify on Maya's stability, and child development professionals to affirm the well-being of the twins. Meanwhile, Maya reached out to an old friend, Simone, a civil rights lawyer who once walked the same shelters Maya had escaped from. Simone's fire was unmatched, and as she hugged Maya at the front door, she whispered, "Let them come for you, sis. I dare them." But the real twist came when a sealed letter arrived in the mail. No return address, only Jack's name, etched in gold. Inside, a photo. Young Maya, pregnant, crying on the streets, taken just days after Jack's cruel divorce. On the back, the scrawl, "I've always known more than you thought. See you in court." Richard had been watching her all along. Jack's blood ran cold. Richard had stalked her past and used her pain as leverage for future manipulation. Jack looked at Maya, tears in her eyes again, not for herself, but for the terror of what was coming. "He's sick," she whispered. "He never loved me. He just wanted to own what you threw away." Jack wrapped her in his arms, holding her tightly, their bodies shaking against each other. "We will end this. He won't take what's ours. Not now. Not ever." Meanwhile, in Richard's high-rise office, the man himself stood before a wall lined with the photos of the twins, Maya, and even Jack, surveillance images, some years old. He poured himself a drink, smiling coldly. "Let's see how far the mighty fall when love becomes their weakness. But what Richard didn't know was that Jack, ruthless in business, was even more dangerous when fueled by love. And Maya, she was no longer the broken girl he once met. She was a mother, a lioness, reborn through struggle and loss. That night, as the rain poured and thunder cracked the sky, Jack and Maya stood in their kitchen, a quiet plan unfolding between them. Not just to fight for their children, but to expose the darkness Richard had cloaked in charm for years. "He knows your weakness," Maya whispered. Jack nodded. "Then it's time we show him our strength." Outside, lightning lit the sky like a prophecy. And in that flash, a war began, not just for custody, but for healing, for truth, and for the soul of a family reuniting beneath the ashes of its past. The storm outside only intensified as Jack and Maya sat at the kitchen table, their hands entwined, knuckles white with determination, as the weight of everything they were about to face settled deep into their bones. The night had become their confessional, their strategy room, their final moment of silence before the whirlwind of courtrooms and character assassinations would tear open every wound they'd once tried to bury. Now they were warriors, not just for their children, but for their right to reclaim the life they never got to build. As thunder rumbled like an omen across the sky, Maya opened an old chest from her bedroom closet, revealing a forgotten stack of journals, old photographs, and one small tattered blanket she had wrapped the twins in on the night of their birth in that shelter that had once been her only refuge. "These," she said, voice thick with memory, "are the pieces of our truth." Jack held the tiny blanket like a sacred relic, the reality of what he missed stabbing deeper than any blade ever could. "We're going to give them a story the courts can't ignore," he said, jaw clenched, a truth so real it drowns out Richard's lies. But Richard, who had always operated like a shadow in moonlight, wasn't just plotting a legal attack. He was tightening a web, bribing court officials with favors, leaking more twisted footage of Jack's past business deals, even spinning Maya's time in shelters into a fabricated story of negligence and danger. The media devoured every lie, and Jack's face, once admired in glossy magazines, was now mocked in tabloid headlines. Ex-millionaire turned family man, hero or hypocrite. The world watched as a private war became public theater. And yet, amid the chaos, something unexpected blossomed. Zara and Isaiah began to bond with Jack, not because he tried to buy their affection, but because he started showing up every morning with burnt pancakes and bedtime stories, silly jokes and patient answers. Each act of presence sowed seeds Maya never thought she'd see bear fruit. The twins started drawing pictures, ones that had 3 smiling faces instead of 2. But not all was smooth. One night, Isaiah overheard a neighbor whispering that Jack had once abandoned Maya when she needed him most, and the boy exploded in confusion. "Is it true?" he demanded, tears shining in his eyes. Jack knelt before him, heartbroken, and said, "Yes, I did the worst thing a man can do. I walked away from someone who loved me. But I'm here now, and I'll never leave again." Maya watched from the doorway, her hand pressed to her chest, knowing that healing didn't come with promises. It came with presence, with showing up in pain and staying through it. Meanwhile, Simone dug deeper into Richard's past, unearthing secrets he'd buried well. 2 restraining orders from past relationships, sealed juvenile records hinting at manipulative behaviors, and worst of all, a hidden bank account under a shell company that had been funneling funds to a media firm currently running smear pieces on Maya. "We've got him," she told Jack one late night, her voice a dagger wrapped in silk. "And we're going to burn him with his own mask." But the final twist came when a mysterious woman approached Maya outside the courthouse, a woman with kind eyes and a weary smile. "I'm Claire," she said. I'm Richard's ex, and I've been where you are." Claire handed over a file filled with therapy records, bruised photographs, and voice recordings of Richard's emotional manipulation, proof that his charm was a weapon. "I stayed silent for years," Claire whispered, voice breaking. "But I see what you're fighting for. Don't let him take your babies." That night, Jack and Maya sat in their living room, surrounded by evidence and tears, and the fire of a love that refused to die. "You deserve peace," Jack whispered, brushing a tear from her cheek. "And so do they." Maya leaned into him, no longer resisting the warmth of his presence, and as their foreheads touched, a promise bloomed, not of a perfect future, but of a real one. In court days later, Richard strutted in, polished and arrogant, his lawyers armed with theatrics. But then came Simone. Then came Claire. Then came the voice of Maya, calm, powerful, unwavering, as she recounted her story, not as a victim, but as a survivor, a mother, and a woman who rebuilt her soul from the ashes of abandonment. And finally, Jack took the stand. Not to defend himself, but to admit his failures, to take responsibility in front of his children, and to show the court that redemption wasn't a fairy tale, but a fight. The judge listened. The room fell into a hush as Zara whispered to Isaiah, "That's our daddy. He's brave." As the gavel echoed and custody remained with Maya, with Jack granted visitation rights and Richard denied all claims, a wave of emotion washed over everyone. Outside the courthouse, Maya and Jack stood hand in hand, not bound by legal winds, but by something deeper. This is just the beginning," Jack said. Maya nodded. "Then let's begin again." Above them, the storm had passed, and in its wake, sunlight poured through the clouds like grace. As the sun broke through the clouds and bathed the courthouse steps in gold, Maya and Jack stood silently, hands intertwined, hearts pounding with both relief and uncertainty. Because though the court had ruled in their favor, the echoes of everything they had endured still clung to their skin like dust from a long, violent storm. Zara and Isaiah ran toward them, their laughter slicing through the tension like music, and as they jumped into their parents' arms, one clinging to Maya, the other wrapping himself around Jack, the four of them, for the first time in their fractured lives, felt whole. Jack closed his eyes, pressing his lips to the crown of his daughter's head, breathing in the scent of her curls, the warmth of her skin, and the truth of what really mattered. Not status, not the corporate kingdom he'd once ruled with an iron will, but this moment, these souls, this family reborn. Maya's fingers trembled against his as they stood there, but her gaze was no longer haunted. It was full of cautious hope, the kind that blooms only after everything else has burned. They returned home that evening to a house now transformed by the weight and triumph of their journey. Photographs of the twins on every wall, drawings taped to the refrigerator, toys littered across the floor like joyful landmines, and Jack's suitcase finally unzipped at the edge of Maya's bed, not as a guest, but as someone choosing to stay. That night, while the twins slept peacefully beneath glow-in-the-dark stars, Jack and Maya sat outside under the real ones, wrapped in a shared blanket, their shoulders pressed together, as if afraid even the night breeze might try to separate them. "I never thought we'd find this," Maya whispered. "Not after everything." Jack turned to her, voice quiet. "You didn't just survive, Maya. You raised light out of darkness. You're the strongest person I've ever known." She looked at him, tears welling again. But these weren't tears of pain. These were the tears of a woman who had finally been seen, finally been loved, without condition. "I never stopped loving you," she admitted. "Even when I hated you, I still hoped you'd come back different." He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "I didn't deserve you then, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to." And as the night deepened, they talked, not just of pain, but of plans, family dinners and bedtime rituals, school pickups and family vacations, charity projects in Maya's name to help mothers like her, and eventually the idea of building something together, a center for homeless women and children in honor of the very shelter that once kept her and the twins alive. But just as peace began to settle into their hearts, a final twist arrived, not with malice, but with mystery. A letter, hand-delivered by a courier with no return address, addressed only to Jack. Inside, a simple note. "I saw your trial. I am proud of who you became. She was right to believe in you." "Mom." Jack's breath caught. His mother. The one he believed had disappeared after marrying his father. The woman he had abandoned emotionally, only to find that she, too, had been watching from the shadows. Just like Maya. Always there. Always waiting. Tears streamed down his face as he passed the letter to Maya, who clutched his hand and kissed his shoulder. "Then maybe," she said softly, "redemption runs in the family." In the months that followed, life blossomed in ways neither of them imagined. The legal war became a story shared in conferences and forums, Maya now a speaker on resilience and motherhood, while Jack poured his wealth into causes that reflected their journey. The house was filled with new laughter, new traditions, new beginnings. The twins grew stronger, bolder, and more secure in their father's arms. And one evening, under fairy lights strung across their backyard, Jack dropped to one knee, not as the man who had once chased beauty, but as the man who had finally understood love. "Maya Daniels," he said, voice trembling, "will you marry me again? Not as the woman I didn't see, but as the woman who saved me." Maya wept, her hands covering her mouth, then nodded through her tears. "Yes, Jack. Yes, 1,000 times yes." As the twins clapped and shouted in glee, as neighbors cheered from across fences, and as the stars once again watched quietly from above, Maya leaned into the arms of the man who had once broken her, and now vowed to spend forever helping her heal. And in that moment, with love wrapped around them like dawn's first light, the story of pain, loss, redemption, and reunion came to rest. Not in sorrow, but in hope, where the strongest woman became not just a survivor, but the heart of a family reborn